For 50 years, they lived with a lie that destroyed everything. Ethan Caldwell spent half a century believing the woman he loved had abandoned him for money. Clara May Bennett mourned the man she thought had drowned in a raging river. But on one cold autumn evening, when an elderly stranger appeared beneath his oak tree and whispered his name, the truth finally surfaced, and it shattered every assumption they'd ever made about love, loss, and betrayal. This is their story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey reaches. The wind carried the scent of dying grass across the open plains of Red Hollow, Montana, a town that had been slowly bleeding population for the better part of 3 decades. What remained were the stubborn ones, the folks too rooted in the land to leave, too proud to admit that progress had passed them by like a freight train that no longer stopped at their station. Ethan Caldwell was one of those stubborn ones. At 73 years old, his hands were still strong enough to mend fence lines, and his back straight enough to saddle a horse without wincing. His ranch sat 5 miles outside what was left of Red Hollow's downtown, a collection of boarded-up storefronts and a diner that only opened 4 days a week. The ranch itself wasn't much to look at anymore. The barn needed new paint. The corrals held fewer cattle than they had in his father's time. But it was his, every weathered board and rusted nail of it. Ethan had lived alone there for the past 8 years, ever since his wife Margaret passed. Before that, they'd shared 42 years together. Good years, mostly quiet years, the kind that didn't make for dramatic stories but built a life nonetheless. She'd been a steady woman, practical and kind, and he'd loved her in the way a man loves a warm fire on a winter night. Grateful, comfortable, necessary. But there had always been a shadow. Margaret had known about it, though they'd never spoken of it directly. It was there in the way Ethan sometimes stared out at the eastern pasture at sunset, his jaw tight with some old pain. It was there in the box he kept in the back of his closet, a small wooden thing he never opened but never threw away. It was there in the name he'd never said aloud in all their years together. Clara May. The sun was setting on this particular October evening, painting the sky in shades of rust and gold that reminded Ethan of better days. Days he'd spent a lifetime trying to forget. He'd just finished checking the water troughs and was heading back to the house when he noticed her. An old woman sat beneath the massive oak tree that had stood sentry beside his porch for longer than he'd been alive. The tree had been there when his grandfather first claimed this land, and it would be there long after Ethan was dust. The woman sat with her back against its trunk, a small suitcase beside her, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight like spun glass. Ethan stopped mid-stride. Visitors were rare out here. The mailman came twice a week. His neighbor, Dutch Hoffman, stopped by every month or so to complain about coyotes. His daughter lived in Seattle and called on Sundays. That was the extent of Ethan's social calendar, and he preferred it that way. This woman was a stranger, or at least she should have been. But something about the way she sat there, the angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, sent a shiver down Ethan's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel drive. The woman didn't look up at first. She seemed to be studying the house, her eyes tracing the lines of the porch, the windows, the stone chimney that rose from the western side. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Ethan's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. She turned to look at him then, and the world seemed to tilt sideways. Her face was lined with age, creased by 70-some years of smiles and sorrows. Her eyes were faded, the bright blue he remembered dulled to a softer shade. But the shape of her face, the curve of her mouth, the way she looked at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Ethan," she said, and her voice cracked on his name like ice breaking on a spring river. "It's me." The suitcase slipped from Ethan's hand and hit the ground with a dull thud. His heart, that stubborn muscle that had kept beating through wars and losses and decades of careful forgetting, suddenly hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. "No," he whispered. "It's Clara May," she said, and now tears were streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Ethan, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I had to come. I had to tell you—" "You're dead," Ethan said flatly. Clara May blinked, confusion replacing the tears. "What? Not dead," he corrected himself, his mind racing. Gone. You left. 50 years ago, you left me for—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The words tasted like poison. Left you? Clara May stood up, gripping the tree for support. Even in her age, even with the weight of years bowing her shoulders, there was steel in her spine. I never left you, Ethan Caldwell. You died. The absurdity of it should have been funny. Two old people standing in a dying light, each insisting the other had been the one to disappear. But there was nothing funny about the way Ethan's hands were shaking, or the way Clara May looked like she might collapse at any moment. I think you'd better come inside, Ethan heard himself say. The interior of the ranch house was exactly what one would expect from a widower living alone. Clean enough not to be shameful, cluttered enough to be honest. Dishes sat in the drying rack by the sink. A week's worth of mail lay scattered on the kitchen table. The living room held a worn leather couch, a recliner with a reading lamp beside it, and a television that Ethan rarely turned on. Clara May stood in the doorway like she was afraid to cross the threshold. Ethan busied himself with lighting a fire in the stone fireplace, giving them both time to breathe, to think, to prepare for whatever conversation was about to unravel 5 decades of certainty. Coffee? He asked. Please. Her voice was soft, uncertain. Nothing like the bold, laughing girl who used to race her horse across these same fields. Nothing like the young woman who'd promised to wait for him while he went on the cattle drive that would change everything. Ethan's hands moved through the familiar ritual of coffee making. Grounds in the filter, water in the reservoir, press the button, and wait. The gurgle and hiss of the machine filled the silence between them. Clara May had moved to the couch. She sat on the edge of it, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. In the firelight, Ethan could see past the wrinkles and the silver hair to the girl he'd once known. It was like looking at a photograph that had been left in the sun too long, faded but recognizable. You look good, he said, then immediately felt foolish. What do you say to a ghost? You look exactly the same, Clara May replied, and there was something in her voice, nostalgia mixed with pain, that made Ethan's chest tighten. Older, but the same. The coffee pot beeped. Ethan poured 2 cups, remembered that Clara May used to take hers with cream and sugar, then realized he had no idea if that was still true. He brought both cups to the living room along with the cream and sugar bowl, setting them on the coffee table. Thank you, Clara May said. She added 1 spoonful of sugar and a splash of cream, stirring slowly. Some things apparently didn't change. Ethan sat in his recliner, the familiar creak of leather a small comfort in this surreal moment. He wrapped his hands around his mug but didn't drink. He wasn't sure he could swallow past the knot in his throat. How did you find me? He asked. It wasn't hard, Clara May said. Your name is still on the deed. I called the county office. She paused. I've known where you were for 3 months now. It took me that long to work up the courage to come. 3 months, Ethan repeated. I'm dying, Ethan. The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara May said them matter-of-factly, without self-pity, the way someone might comment on the weather. Cancer, she continued. Pancreatic. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. That was 4 months ago. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. Clara, I'm not here for sympathy, she said quickly. I'm here because I spent 50 years believing you were dead, and 3 months ago I found out that was a lie. And if I'm going to die, I need to understand what happened. I need to know why everyone told me you drowned when you clearly didn't. The fire popped and crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Start at the beginning, Ethan said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears, like he was listening to someone else speak. Tell me everything. Clara May's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. She'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times on the long bus ride from Nebraska, but now that the moment had arrived, the words seemed to scatter like startled birds. It was 1975, she began. September. You'd signed on for the big cattle drive to the northern ranches, the one that was supposed to take 3 weeks. Ethan nodded slowly. He remembered. God, how he remembered. We'd been planning to get married when you got back, Clara May continued, her voice strengthening with the telling. You'd saved enough money to buy that piece of land on the eastern ridge, and my father had finally agreed to give his blessing. Everything was set. I proposed to you under this very tree, Ethan said quietly. Clara May's eyes glistened. You did. I can still see you, down on one knee in the dirt, too nervous to look me in the eye. I said yes before you even got the question out. For a moment they both smiled, two old people sharing a memory that felt both immediate and impossibly distant. You left on a Monday, Clara May said. You were supposed to be back by October 1st. We were going to be married on October 15th. I remember, Ethan said. But you didn't come back. Clara May's voice began to shake. October 1st came and went, then the 2nd, the 3rd. By the 5th, I was worried. By the 7th, I was terrified. And then on October 8th, 3 men came to our house. They were from the drive. They said there had been a storm. The Lightning River had flooded. You and 2 other men had tried to get the cattle across, and her voice broke. Even after 50 years, the memory had the power to cut. They said you drowned, Clara May whispered. They said they searched for 2 days, but the current was too strong. They said your body was probably miles downstream, and we'd likely never find it. They gave my father your hat. It was torn and muddy, but it was yours. I'd given it to you for your birthday. Ethan's hand moved unconsciously to his head. He'd lost that hat in the river. He'd nearly lost his life. I didn't drown, he said. I know that now, Clara May said, her voice sharp with half a century of anger. But I didn't know then. They buried an empty coffin. The whole town came. My mother had to hold me up because I couldn't stand on my own. I cried so hard I made myself sick. Ethan closed his eyes. He'd imagined Clara May marrying another man. He'd imagined her happy, secure, living a better life than he could have given her. He'd never imagined her mourning him. He'd never imagined a funeral. What really happened? Clara May asked. How did you survive? Ethan took a long breath. The memories he'd buried came flooding back with painful clarity. We did try to cross the Lightning River, he said, and there was a flood, the worst I'd ever seen. The water was moving so fast it looked like it was boiling. We'd already lost most of the day waiting for it to go down, but the boss said we were behind schedule and had to push through. He paused, seeing it all again. The angry water, the terrified cattle, the rope around his waist. I went across first on horseback, trailing a rope for the others. I was halfway across when my horse panicked, threw me right into the current. The rope snapped. I went under. Clara May's hand covered her mouth. I should have died, Ethan said simply. The current took me under 3, maybe 4 times. I couldn't tell which way was up. I thought about you with every breath I couldn't take. I remember thinking that I'd broken my promise, that I wouldn't make it back to marry you. But you did make it back, Clara May said. 3 miles downstream, I managed to grab onto a fallen tree. Pulled myself out more dead than alive. It took me 2 days to walk back to where the drive was camped. By the time I got there, half frozen and delirious, they'd already sent word home that I'd drowned. They saw you come back, Clara May said, her voice rising with confusion and anger. They knew you were alive. Why didn't they tell anyone? Why didn't they send word to my family? They did send word, Ethan said bitterly, or so they told me. The boss sent a rider back to Red Hollow to correct the message. That rider was supposed to reach town within a day. He never arrived, Clara May whispered. No, Ethan said. He never did. We found out later he'd gotten drunk in a town 50 miles south and forgot about the message entirely. By the time we finished the drive and came home 3 weeks later, you were already gone. Clara May stood up abruptly, her coffee cup clattering onto the table. She walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. I don't understand, she said. Gone where? I never left Red Hollow. I lived there until 1980. Now it was Ethan's turn to look confused. That's not what I was told, he said slowly. When I got back to Red Hollow, I went straight to your father's house. Your father met me at the door with a shotgun. Clara May spun around. What? He told me you'd married William Hartley, Ethan said, the old wound splitting open with every word. He said you'd given up on me and decided to marry someone who could actually provide for you. He said Hartley had money and land and that you'd made your choice. He told me if I ever came near you again, he'd kill me. That's not true. Clara May's voice cracked like a whip. None of that is true. I tried to see you, Ethan said, his own voice rising. I waited outside the Hartley estate for 3 days. I saw you come out once, on Hartley's arm, wearing fine clothes I could never afford. You looked happy, Clara. You looked like you'd moved on." Clara May's face had gone white. "You saw me at the Hartley estate?" "I did." "When? What month?" "Late October, maybe early November. I don't remember exactly." Clara May sank back onto the couch, her hand pressed to her chest. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "My father arranged it all," she said. "After they told me you were dead, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just wanted to die too. My mother was terrified I'd do something desperate. William Hartley had been courting me before you and I started seeing each other. He came to my father and offered to marry me anyway, to take care of me in my grief." "Generous of him," Ethan said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "My father accepted on my behalf," Clara May continued, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to marry him. I didn't want to marry anyone. But my father said it was the best thing for me, that I needed stability, that William was a good man who would be patient with me." "So you did marry him," Ethan said. "Yes," Clara May said. "In November 1975. A quiet ceremony. I cried through the whole thing. William was patient, like my father promised. He gave me time to grieve. He never forced—" She stopped, her voice catching. "He was kind, Ethan. He loved me in his way." "Did you love him?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Clara May met Ethan's eyes. "I learned to. It took years, but I learned to. He gave me a good life, 3 children, a home, security. He died 10 years ago, and I mourned him honestly. But I never stopped thinking about you. Not once in 50 years did I stop wondering what our life would have been like if you hadn't drowned." "I didn't drown," Ethan said again, the words tasting like ash. "I know that now," Clara May said. "But I didn't know then. And apparently you didn't know that I never willingly left you." They stared at each other across the coffee table, 2 people separated by 5 feet of space and 50 years of misunderstanding. "Your father lied to me," Ethan said. "My father thought you were dead," Clara May countered. "When you showed up alive, he must have panicked. I was already engaged to William by then. The wedding was planned. My father probably thought he was protecting me from more heartbreak." "By telling me you'd abandoned me for money?" "By making sure you wouldn't try to stop the wedding," Clara May said. "Don't you see? If he'd told you the truth, that I thought you were dead, that I was marrying William out of grief and duty, what would you have done?" Ethan knew exactly what he would have done. He would have fought for her. He would have dragged her away from that estate and convinced her that he was alive, that they could still have the life they'd planned. "He knew you'd come for me," Clara May said softly, "so he made you believe I didn't want to be found." "And you never knew I was alive," Ethan said. "Not until 3 months ago," Clara May said. "My youngest daughter was helping me sort through some old boxes. We found letters my father had kept hidden, letters you'd sent to me after you got back from the drive." Ethan felt his heart stop. "I sent you letters, dozens of them. You never responded." "Because I never received them," Clara May said. "My father intercepted every single one. He kept them in a locked box in his study. After he died in 1992, my mother must have hidden them. I don't know why. Maybe she thought it was better if I never knew. Maybe she was protecting my father's memory." "How many letters?" Ethan asked. 23, Clara May said. "Written over the course of 2 years. The last one was dated December 1977. You said you were getting married to a woman named Margaret. You said you hoped I was happy. You said goodbye." The weight of it all, the lies, the missed chances, the decades of grief built on false assumptions, settled over the room like a heavy blanket. "I loved Margaret," Ethan said quietly. "She was a good woman. She made me happy." "I'm glad," Clara May said, and she sounded like she meant it. "You deserved happiness." "So did you." "We both got it," Clara May said, "just not with each other." The fire was burning low. Ethan added another log, watching the flames leap and dance. When he turned back, Clara May was crying again, quiet tears that traced the lines of her face. "I'm so angry," she said. "At my father, at that drunk messenger, at fate or God or whatever force decided we didn't get to have the life we planned. I'm so angry, Ethan. Me too, Ethan said. But I'm also grateful, Clara May continued, because if you hadn't survived that river, if you really had drowned, I would never have this moment. I would never get to sit here and know the truth. I would die believing you'd left me alone in this world without a second thought. I thought about you every day, Ethan said, even after I married Margaret, even after I built a whole life that didn't include you. There was always this part of me that wondered, what if? Me too, Claire May whispered. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire burn. Outside, full dark had fallen. The prairie stretched out in all directions, vast and indifferent to human heartbreak. Why now? Ethan finally asked. Why come find me now, after all these years? Clara May smiled sadly. Because I'm dying, Ethan. And I realized that I didn't want to die with lies between us. Even if you hated me, even if you turned me away at the door, I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I never stopped loving you, that I mourned you, that our love wasn't some silly teenage fantasy that I outgrew. I never thought it was, Ethan said. Didn't you? Clara May challenged gently. Didn't you tell yourself over the years that it was just young love, that it wouldn't have lasted anyway, that you were better off with Margaret? Ethan wanted to deny it, but he couldn't, because she was right. He had told himself exactly those things. It was the only way to make peace with losing her. Margaret knew, he said. She never said anything, but she knew. I kept one thing from our time together, just one thing, a photograph of you at the county fair. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. What did Margaret think about that? She said every person carries ghosts, Ethan said. She said as long as I loved her in the present, she could live with me loving you in the past. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Clara May said. She was, Ethan agreed. I miss her every day. William was remarkable too, Clara May said. He knew I'd loved someone before him. He never asked me to forget you. He just asked me to make room for him alongside the memory. Did you? Ethan asked. Make room? I did, Clara May said. But you were always there, Ethan, in the back of my mind, in the quiet moments. You were the road not taken, the life that might have been. Ethan stood up and walked to the mantel above the fireplace. Behind a photo of him and Margaret, hidden from casual view, was the picture he'd mentioned. He pulled it out and looked at it. A faded photograph of a young woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile, her arm around a horse's neck. He carried it back to Clara May and handed it to her. She took it with trembling hands, staring at the girl she used to be. I was so young, she said. We both were. Too young to understand that the world doesn't care about promises, Ethan said. But old enough to mean them, Clara May countered. She looked up at him, her faded blue eyes meeting his. If things had been different, she said. If the messenger hadn't gotten drunk, if my father had told you the truth, if we'd found each other again before the wedding, do you think we would have made it? Do you think our love would have survived the real world? It was the question they'd both been dancing around all evening. The big one. The one that could break whatever fragile understanding they were building. Ethan sat down beside her on the couch, closer than before, close enough that he could see the faint scar above her left eyebrow where she'd fallen from a horse when they were teenagers. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe we would have. Maybe the universe separated us for a reason. Maybe we would have made each other miserable. Or maybe we would have been happy, Clara May said. Or maybe that, Ethan agreed. I choose to believe we would have been happy, Clara May said firmly. I choose to believe that all these years of separation and pain were just the world being cruel, not the world being wise. Ethan reached out and took her hand. Her skin was soft and papery, her fingers bent with arthritis, but her grip was strong. I believe that too, he said. And in that moment, sitting in the firelight of his quiet ranch house, Ethan Caldwell forgave the world for taking Clara May from him. And Clara May Bennett forgave the world for making her believe Ethan was dead. They couldn't get back the 50 years they'd lost. They couldn't undo the lies or rewrite the past. But they could sit here, hand in hand, and finally know the truth. What happens now? Clara May asked. Ethan had no idea. This woman was dying. She'd come here seeking closure, seeking truth, seeking some kind of peace before the end. He couldn't offer her a future. He couldn't offer her anything except this moment. But maybe this moment was enough. Now, he said slowly, you stay the night. It's too dark to travel, and you look exhausted. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. I don't want to impose, Clara May started. You're not imposing, Ethan said. I've got a guest room. Margaret insisted we keep it made up, even though we rarely had visitors. You'll stay. Clara May nodded, too tired to argue. Ethan showed her to the guest room, a small space with a double bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. He brought her fresh towels and made sure she had everything she needed. Thank you, Clara May said from the doorway, for listening, for not turning me away. Thank you for coming, Ethan said, for being brave enough to find me. I'll see you in the morning? I'll make breakfast, Ethan promised. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage eggs and coffee. Clara May smiled, a real smile this time, one that erased 50 years from her face. That sounds perfect, she said. Ethan lay awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling. The house felt different with someone else in it. The silence had a different quality, less lonely, more alive. He thought about Margaret and wondered what she would make of all this. She'd been a practical woman, not given to jealousy or melodrama. He thought she might understand. She might even approve. He thought about Clara May, dying in his guest room, carrying the weight of 50 years of misunderstanding. He thought about the life they might have had, the children who were never born, the mornings they never shared, the old age they never reached together. But mostly, he thought about the photograph on his mantle, the young woman with the bright smile who'd promised to wait for him, who had waited in her way, who'd mourned him, who'd loved him even when she thought he was dead. The truth had come 50 years too late to change anything, but it had come nonetheless. And in the darkness of his room, Ethan Caldwell felt something he hadn't felt in decades. A door that had been locked shut beginning, ever so slightly, to open. Morning light filtered through the curtains in shades of amber and pale gold, painting the guest room in colors that reminded Clara May of watercolor paintings her daughter used to make in elementary school. She'd woken before dawn, her body still operating on the strict schedule that illness had imposed. Wake at 5, take pills at 5:30, assess the pain level before deciding whether to get out of bed. Today the pain was manageable, a dull ache in her abdomen, a heaviness in her bones that had become so familiar it almost felt normal. She took her pills with water from the glass Ethan had left on the nightstand, then sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself a moment to simply breathe. She was here, in Ethan Caldwell's house. After 50 years of believing him dead, after 3 months of knowing he was alive but being too terrified to face him, she was finally here. The conversation from last night played through her mind in fragments. The shock in his eyes when she'd said her name, the way his hands had trembled when he poured the coffee, the photograph he'd kept hidden all these years, and most of all, the truth. The terrible, beautiful truth that they had both been victims of circumstance and poor communication and the casual cruelties of fate. Clara May stood and walked to the window. The eastern pasture stretched out before her, endless and empty in the early morning light. Somewhere out there, 50 years ago, Ethan had planned to build them a house. She wondered if he'd ever actually bought that land, or if he'd abandoned the dream when he thought she'd abandoned him. She dressed slowly in the clothes she'd brought, simple things, practical for traveling, and studied herself in the small mirror above the dresser. An old woman looked back at her, silver hair that had once been the color of honey, lines around her eyes and mouth that mapped out decades of smiles and sorrows, hands that shook slightly from medication and nerves. She wondered what Ethan saw when he looked at her. Did he see the girl from the photograph, hidden somewhere beneath the ravages of time? Or did he see only a stranger wearing a familiar name? The smell of coffee drifted through the house, followed by the sound of something sizzling in a pan. Clara May made the bed, a habit ingrained from childhood, and then made her way to the kitchen. Ethan stood at the stove, his back to her, working a spatula through a pan of scrambled eggs. He'd already set the table with 2 plates, 2 mugs, a jar of homemade preserves, and a plate of toast. The domestic simplicity of it made Clara May's throat tighten. "Morning," she said softly. Ethan turned, spatula still in hand. He'd changed into fresh clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, both worn but clean. His hair, still damp from a shower, was combed back from his forehead. In the morning light, she could see the ways age had changed him. The deep lines around his eyes, the silver stubble on his jaw, the way he moved a little more carefully, a little more slowly than the young man who'd once vaulted onto horses without thinking twice. "Morning," he replied. "Coffee's fresh. I wasn't sure if you still took it the same way, but I put cream and sugar on the table just in case." "Some things don't change," Clara May said, moving to pour herself a cup. They settled at the kitchen table, the eggs divided between their plates, the toast buttered and waiting. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with all the things they hadn't said yet. "Did you sleep?" Ethan asked finally. "Better than I expected," Clara May admitted. "Your guest room is lovely. Margaret had good taste." "She did," Ethan agreed. He took a bite of eggs, chewed thoughtfully, then set down his fork. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about the letters." Clara May's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "I need to know," Ethan continued, his voice steady but tight. "What did they say? The letters I sent. Do you remember?" "I read every one of them 3 times, Clara May said. "I practically memorized them." "Tell me." Clara May took a breath. This was harder than she'd expected, reconstructing words written in pain and anger and desperate hope by a young man who thought he'd been betrayed. "The first one was dated November 1975, she began. "About 2 weeks after my wedding to William. You didn't know I'd gotten married yet. You were writing to tell me that you were alive, that the reports of your drowning had been wrong. You said you'd come to my father's house, but he'd turned you away. You asked me to meet you at the oak tree where you'd proposed." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You never came." "I never got the letter," Clara May said. "I was on my honeymoon. William took me to Denver for 2 weeks. When we came back, my father never mentioned that you'd been looking for me." "The bastard," Ethan muttered. Clara May couldn't disagree. Her father had been a hard man, shaped by the Depression and a lifetime of scratching survival from unwilling soil. But what he'd done to both of them, that went beyond hardness into something crueler. "The second letter was in December," she continued. "You'd heard about my marriage by then. You were angry. You said things—" She stopped, the memory of those words still sharp enough to cut. "You said I'd traded you for a bigger house and a fatter wallet. You said you'd been a fool to think someone like me could love someone like you." "I was hurt," Ethan said quietly. "I know," Clara May said. "I would have been angry too if I'd thought you'd married someone else while I was still grieving." She took a sip of coffee, gathering strength to continue. "The third letter was different. It came in January 1976. You apologized for the second letter. You said you'd had time to think, and you realized that maybe you hadn't known me as well as you thought. You said you hoped I was happy. You said you were trying to move on." "I wasn't," Ethan said. "Moving on, I mean. I was drowning in whiskey and self-pity." "The next few letters were scattered over the spring and summer," Clara May said. "You wrote about the ranch, about your father's health declining, about trying to keep the place running. You stopped mentioning me directly, but there was this undercurrent of sadness in every line, like you were writing to a ghost." "I was," Ethan said. Clara May reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The last letters were in the fall of 1977. "You wrote that you'd met someone named Margaret. You said she was kind and patient and didn't ask questions about your past. You said you thought maybe you could build a life with her." "The final letter was in December. You said you were getting married on New Year's Eve. You said you hoped wherever I was, whatever life I'd built, that I was truly happy. You said goodbye." Ethan pulled his hand away and stood abruptly, walking to the window above the sink. His shoulders were rigid, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I meant it," he said, his voice rough. "When I wrote that, I hoped you were happy. I was angry and hurt and bitter, but underneath all of that, I still loved you enough to want you to be happy." "I know," Clara May said. "I could feel it in the words, even the angry letter, especially the angry letter. You could only write something that hurt because you cared so much." Ethan turned to face her. "Did it hurt you? Reading them now, knowing what you thought had happened to me?" "Yes," Clara May said simply. It hurt like nothing else has ever hurt. Because I realized that while I was mourning you, you were mourning the loss of me in a different way. You were grieving a betrayal that never happened. And I couldn't go back and fix it. I couldn't tell that young man writing those letters that it was all a lie. We lost so much time, Ethan said. We did, Clara May agreed, but we can't get it back. We can only decide what to do with the time we have left. The weight of that statement settled over the kitchen. Clara May had maybe 2 months left, if the doctors were right. 2 months to make peace with a lifetime of misunderstanding. It seemed both impossibly short and terrifyingly long. Ethan returned to the table but didn't sit. Instead, he stood beside his chair, one hand resting on its back. Last night you said you came here to tell me the truth before you died, he said. Is that all you came for? Just to clear the air? Clara May considered the question. In her planning, in her rehearsals during the long bus ride, she'd told herself that truth was enough, that she just needed Ethan to know she hadn't abandoned him, and then she could die in peace. But sitting here in his kitchen, watching the morning light paint gold across his weathered face, she realized that wasn't entirely honest. No, she said, that's not all. What else? Ethan asked. I came because I'm dying alone, Clara May said, the words coming out in a rush. My children have their own lives. They visit when they can, but they have jobs and families and obligations. My friends are all as old as I am, dealing with their own illnesses and losses. I've been living in a retirement home in Nebraska for the past 2 years, and it's fine. It's comfortable and clean, and the staff is kind, but it's not home. And I realized that I didn't want to die in some sterile room being cared for by strangers who have to check my chart to remember my name. She paused, trying to find the courage to say the rest. I came because you're the only person left in this world who knew me when I was young, she continued, who remembers what I was like before life wore me down. And I hoped, that maybe you wouldn't mind if I spent my last week somewhere that felt real. Somewhere I could look out the window and see the land I used to dream about, with someone who remembers those dreams. Ethan sank into his chair. His face was unreadable. You want to stay here? He said. Yes, Clara May said, but I'll understand if that's too much to ask. We're strangers now, really. Strangers who used to be in love, and I have no right to impose on your life just because I'm dying. Stop, Ethan said firmly. Stop apologizing for needing something. He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. They sat that way for a long moment, two old people holding on to each other across a gulf of years. Margaret died here, Ethan said finally. In our bedroom. Hospice came in for the last 2 weeks, but mostly it was just me and her. She didn't want to die in a hospital. She said she wanted to see the sunrise over the eastern pasture one last time. Did she? Clara May asked softly. Get to see it. She did, Ethan said. The morning she died, I carried her to the porch, and we watched the sun come up together. She died about an hour later, in my arms, with the light on her face. Tears streamed down Clara May's cheeks. That's beautiful. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, Ethan said. Watching her slip away. Knowing I couldn't stop it, but I'm glad I was with her. I'm glad she didn't have to face it alone. He squeezed Clara May's hands. You can stay, he said, for as long as you need, for as long as you have. Clara May couldn't speak. The relief was so overwhelming it felt physical, like a weight lifting from her chest. Are you sure? She finally managed. I'm sure, Ethan said. I've been living alone in this house for 8 years. It'll be nice to have someone to cook breakfast for again. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence. Clara May told him about her children, 3 daughters, all married, 7 grandchildren scattered across the country. Ethan told her about his daughter in Seattle, a lawyer who kept trying to convince him to sell the ranch and move to the city. She means well, Ethan said, but I can't leave this place. It's in my bones. I understand, Clara May said. William and I lived in town, but I always missed the wide open spaces, the way you can see weather coming from miles away, the quiet. After breakfast, Ethan showed her around the ranch. It was smaller than she'd imagined, just 40 acres now, down from the 200 his grandfather had originally claimed. He'd sold off parcels over the years to keep the place afloat, until what remained was just the house, the barn, and enough grazing land for a small herd. "It's not much," Ethan said as they walked toward the barn. "Nothing like what I promised you when we were young." "It's perfect," Clara May said, and she meant it. There was something honest about this place, something real. It didn't pretend to be more than it was. The barn smelled of hay and horses and old wood. 2 horses stood in their stalls, an older gelding named Dutch, and a younger mare named Sunset. "You still ride?" Clara May asked, surprised. "Not as much as I used to," Ethan admitted. "But yeah, I get out a few times a week. Keeps me from getting too stiff." Clara May approached Sunset's stall. The mare had a white blaze down her face and gentle eyes. She nickered softly as Clara May extended her hand. "She's beautiful," Clara May said. "You want to ride?" Ethan asked. Clara May laughed. "I haven't been on a horse in 30 years. "It's like swimming," Ethan said. "You don't forget." "I'm dying of cancer," Clara May pointed out. "I'm not sure horseback riding is in my immediate future." "You're not dead yet," Ethan countered, "and I seem to remember a girl who once raced me across 3 miles of open prairie and won." The challenge in his voice was gentle but unmistakable. Clara May felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of the boldness she'd once possessed. "Not today," she said, "but maybe soon." "I'll hold you to that," Ethan said. They continued the tour. He showed her the chicken coop where 6 hens pecked and scratched in the dirt. The vegetable garden, mostly finished for the season but still producing the last of the tomatoes. The old oak tree where he'd proposed, its branches now bare for winter. Clara May stood beneath that tree, one hand on its rough bark, and closed her eyes. She could almost feel it, the ghost of her younger self, laughing as Ethan stumbled through his proposal, saying yes before he could even finish asking. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "what our children would have been like?" Ethan stood beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "All the time," he admitted, "especially after Margaret and I had our daughter. I'd look at her and wonder if our kids would have had your eyes or my stubborn streak." "Your daughter, what's her name?" "Rachel," Ethan said. "She's 45 now, smart as a whip, took after her mother that way." "I'd like to hear about her," Clara May said, "if you don't mind talking about it." "I don't mind," Ethan said. They walked back to the house slowly, Ethan's hands in his pockets, Clara May's arms wrapped around herself against the cool morning air. He told her about Rachel's childhood, about how she'd wanted to be a veterinarian until she'd discovered debate team in high school, about her college years, her marriage to a software engineer, her decision not to have children. "She was always more interested in ideas than people," Ethan said fondly. "She gets that from me. Margaret was the social one." "What did Margaret think of me?" Clara May asked. The question surprised her even as she asked it, but she needed to know. Ethan didn't answer right away. They'd reached the porch, and he settled into one of the 2 rocking chairs that faced the eastern pasture. Clara May took the other. "She knew I'd loved someone before her," Ethan said finally. "I never told her your name, but she knew. About a year into our marriage, she found the photograph. She didn't say anything at first, just put it back where she'd found it. But that night, she asked me if I still loved you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," Ethan said. "I said that I loved the memory of you, but I loved her in the present. I said that you were my past, but she was my future. And I meant it, Clara, every word." "I believe you," Clara May said. "But Margaret was wise," Ethan continued. "She said that the past and the future weren't as separate as people like to think. She said that loving someone in the past didn't diminish loving someone in the present. She said the heart was big enough for both as long as I was honest about it." "She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman," Clara May said. "She was," Ethan agreed. "You would have liked her. She had this way of seeing through people's defenses, straight to the heart of things. She would have understood why you're here." "Do you?" Clara May asked. "Understand why I'm here?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, rocking gently in his chair. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. "I think you're here because you need to know it was real," he said finally. "Our love." our plans, all of it. You need to know that it mattered, even though it didn't work out the way we thought it would. Clara May felt tears prick her eyes again. Yes, that's exactly it. It was real, Ethan said firmly. And it mattered. You mattered to me then, and you matter to me now. They sat in companionable silence, watching the prairie grass bend and wave in the wind. Clara May felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. I should call my daughters, she said eventually. Let them know where I am. They'll worry. Use the phone in the kitchen, Ethan said. Take your time. The first call was to her oldest daughter, Patricia, who lived in Omaha with her husband and 2 teenage sons. Patricia answered on the third ring, her voice sharp with worry. Mom, where are you? The nursing home called this morning and said you'd checked yourself out. They said you left a note, but it didn't say where you were going. I'm in Montana, Clara May said calmly. Montana? What are you doing in Montana? Mom, you're in no condition to be traveling alone. What if something happens? What if… Patricia, Clara May interrupted gently. I'm fine. I'm with a friend. What friend? You don't know anyone in Montana. Clara May took a breath. I'm with Ethan Caldwell. You remember, I told you about him when we found your grandfather's letters. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The boy you were engaged to before Dad? Patricia's voice had shifted from worried to confused. Mom, that was 50 years ago. I know how long it's been, Clara May said, but I needed to see him, to talk to him, and he's offered to let me stay here for a while. Stay there? Mom, you need medical care. I need peace, Clara May said firmly, and I found it here. I'll keep taking my medications. I'll go to the hospital if things get bad. But for right now, I'm staying. Another pause. Then Patricia sighed, the sound of a daughter recognizing when her mother had made up her mind. Is he taking good care of you? She asked finally. Yes, Clara May said, glancing toward the window where she could see Ethan in the yard, checking fence posts. He is. Okay, Patricia said, but I'm calling every other day to check on you. And if anything changes, you'll be the first to know, Clara May promised. The calls to her other 2 daughters went similarly. Initial shock, worry, eventual acceptance. Her youngest, Sarah, actually seemed pleased. I'm glad you're doing something for yourself, Mom, she said. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else. You deserve this. After the calls, Clara May found Ethan in the barn, repairing a broken stall door. He looked up as she entered, a question in his eyes. They're worried, Clara May reported, but they understand, or at least they're trying to. Good, Ethan said. He set down his tools and brushed sawdust from his hands. I've been thinking. We should set some ground rules, make sure we're both comfortable with this arrangement. All right, Clara May said. First, Ethan said, you're a guest, not a patient. I'm not going to hover over you or treat you like you're made of glass. You tell me what you need, and I'll do my best to provide it. But you don't have to apologize for existing in my space. Agreed, Clara May said. Second, Ethan continued, we're honest with each other. If something's bothering you, you say so. If you're in pain, you tell me. If you need space, you take it. No pretending everything's fine when it's not. That works both ways, Clara May said. If having me here gets to be too much, you tell me. I will, Ethan promised. Third, we don't live in the past. We acknowledge it, we talk about it when we need to, but we don't get stuck there. These last weeks or months or however long you have, they're not about regret. They're about right now. Clara May nodded, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. One more thing, she said. I want to help. I can't do physical labor, but I can cook, I can clean, I can be useful. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Ethan said. But if it makes you feel better to help, I won't stop you. Margaret always said the kitchen was her domain anyway. I've been eating out of cans and boxes for 8 years. A home-cooked meal would be welcome. They shook hands on it, formal and slightly ridiculous, and then they both laughed. We're a pair, aren't we? Clara May said. We always were, Ethan replied. That afternoon, Clara May insisted on making dinner. Ethan had a well-stocked pantry, the result of living miles from the nearest grocery store, and she found chicken, vegetables, rice. Nothing fancy, but she could make it work. As she moved around the kitchen, Ethan sat at the table, pretending to read the newspaper but actually watching her. She could feel his eyes on her, and it made her self-conscious in a way that felt oddly young. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "Sorry," Ethan said, not sounding sorry at all. "It's just strange seeing you here, in this kitchen, in this life." "Strange good or strange bad?" Clara May asked. "Strange, right," Ethan said. "Like finding a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing." Clara May turned to face him, a wooden spoon in her hand. "I know what you mean. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that you're still dead and I'm still in that nursing home, counting down the days alone." "Not a dream," Ethan said. "You're here. I'm here. This is real." "Yeah," Clara May said softly. "It is." Dinner was simple but good. They ate at the kitchen table as the sun set, talking about small things, the weather, the state of the barn roof, a fox Ethan had seen last week near the chicken coop. It was comfortable, domestic, normal. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Ethan built another fire while Clara May settled on the couch with a blanket. The pain medication was making her drowsy, but she fought against sleep. She didn't want to miss a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said, poking at the fire. "Anything," Clara May replied. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Of dying, I mean." Clara May considered the question. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. She'd been terrified of the slow fade, the loss of dignity, the pain that would inevitably come. But now, sitting in this warm room with this man who'd once promised to love her forever, fear felt less immediate. "I'm afraid of the process," she admitted, "the suffering that comes before the end. But death itself? No, I'm not afraid of that. I'm just sad that I won't get to see how everything turns out. My grandchildren growing up, the next presidential election, whether that fox gets into your chicken coop." Ethan smiled. "I'll write you a letter. Let you know about the fox." "I'd appreciate that," Clara May said, playing along. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you afraid? Of dying?" Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore. I'm 73. I've had a good life. When my time comes, I hope it's quick. A heart attack while I'm checking the fence line, maybe. Something where I don't linger." "That's very practical of you," Clara May said. "Margaret's influence," Ethan said. "She made me promise not to let them keep her alive on machines. Said when it was time, it was time. I feel the same way." He settled into his recliner, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "But I'm glad you're here," he continued. "Whatever time you have left, I'm glad we get to spend it together. Even if it's just a few weeks. Even if it ends with me burying another person I love." The words hung in the air between them. "You still love me?" Clara May asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan met her eyes across the room. "I never stopped. I just learned to live with loving you from a distance, but now that you're here," he trailed off, searching for words. "It's like the past 50 years compressed into nothing. Like I'm 23 again, looking at the girl I wanted to spend my life with." "We're not 23, Clara May said. "No," Ethan agreed. "We're not. We're old and tired and broken in ways we weren't back then. But the heart doesn't care about wrinkles or gray hair or time. The heart just knows what it knows." Clara May pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I loved William. I need you to know that. It wasn't what we had, but it was real." "I know," Ethan said, "and I loved Margaret. But that doesn't change the fact that you were my first love, my great what if. And now you're here, and I don't know what to do with that except be grateful for it." They sat in silence as the fire burned low. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Clara May felt sleep pulling at her, heavy and insistent. "I should get to bed," she said reluctantly. "Okay," Ethan said. He stood and offered her his hand to help her up. She took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength still present in his grip despite his age. At the door to the guest room, she paused. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me stay, for not being angry about the past, for giving me this gift." "It's not a gift," Ethan said. "It's just what should have been, arriving 50 years late." Clara May stood on her toes, not as easy as it used to be, and kissed his cheek. His skin was warm, slightly rough with evening stubble. "Good night, Ethan," she said. "Good night, Clara May," he replied. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than it should. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see the room Ethan had prepared for her. The clean sheets, the fresh towels, the small vase of wildflowers on the dresser that he must have picked while she was on the phone. Such small kindnesses, such ordinary gestures. But to Clara May, dying and alone and finally home in a way she'd never expected, they meant everything. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar, like remembering the steps to a dance learned long ago. Clara May woke each morning to the sound of Ethan moving through the house, the creak of floorboards announcing his progress from bedroom to kitchen to barn. She'd lie still for a few minutes, cataloging the pain, where it was, how bad, whether it was getting worse, and then she'd rise and join him. They'd fallen into an unspoken arrangement. Ethan made the coffee. Clara May made breakfast. They ate together at the kitchen table, watching the sun climb over the eastern pasture, painting the frost-covered grass in shades of pink and gold. The conversations during these meals were easy, unremarkable. The weather, plans for the day, whether the chickens were laying enough eggs. It was only later, as the days accumulated into weeks, that Clara May realized what was happening. They were building a life together. Not the life they'd imagined 50 years ago, full of children and expansion and bright futures. This was something quieter, more fragile. A life measured in morning coffee and shared silences and the simple comfort of not being alone. On the fifth morning, Clara May woke to find fresh snow covering the ground. The first real snow of the season, early even for Montana. She stood at the window of her room, watching the world transform into something clean and new, and felt an ache that had nothing to do with her illness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. He'd taken to bringing her coffee in the mornings, claiming it saved time, though they both knew it was really about checking on her without making it obvious. "I'd forgotten what snow looks like out here," Clara May said, accepting the mug. "In Nebraska, everything's so flat. The snow just sits there. But here, with the hills and the barn and that old oak tree, it's like a painting." "Margaret used to say the same thing," Ethan said. He joined her at the window. First snow was her favorite. She'd stand right here and watch it fall for hours. Clara May expected to feel jealousy at the mention of Margaret, but instead she felt something closer to kinship. 2 women, separated by decades, sharing the same space, the same view, the same man. "Tell me about her," Clara May said. "Really tell me. Not just the facts, but who she was." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, steam rising from his coffee cup. "She was steady," he said finally. "That's the word that always comes to mind. Steady like a river. Always flowing, always there, never asking for more than she was given. She grew up on a ranch about 30 miles from here. Her father drank himself to death when she was 16, and she had to run the place with just her mother and her younger brother. She learned to shoe horses, mend fences, deliver calves. When I met her, she had calluses on her hands and dirt under her fingernails and the most honest eyes I'd ever seen." "How did you meet?" Clara May asked. "Feed store in Red Hollow," Ethan said, a smile touching his lips. "I was there buying grain. She was there arguing with the owner about a bad batch of hay he'd sold her mother. She won the argument, got a full refund and an apology. I asked her to coffee, and she said yes, but only if I was buying since she'd just spent her coffee money on hay." Clara May laughed softly. "She sounds practical." "She was," Ethan agreed. "But she had this other side too. She loved music, used to play piano, though we could never afford one for the house. She'd go into town once a week and practice on the piano at the church. The Reverend gave her a key. Sometimes I'd go with her and just sit in the pews, listening to her play. She was happiest then, I think, lost in the music." Did she know?" Clara May asked quietly. "About us?" Ethan turned from the window to face her. "She knew I'd loved someone before her. She knew that person had broken my heart, but I never told her your name or what really happened. It felt like betraying you somehow, even though I thought you'd betrayed me." "You were protecting my memory," Clara May said. Maybe, Ethan said. Or maybe I was protecting myself. As long as I didn't say it out loud, I could pretend it didn't hurt as much as it did. Clara May set down her coffee cup and reached for his hand, their fingers intertwined naturally, like they'd been holding hands for decades instead of days. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. For believing you were dead, for marrying William, for not fighting harder to find the truth. Don't, Ethan said firmly. We're not doing that, remember? No regrets. Just right now. Right now, Clara May repeated. She squeezed his hand. Okay. Right now I want to see the ranch in the snow. Will you walk with me? Ethan's expression shifted to concern. It's cold out there. And you're not… I'm dying. Not dead, Clara May interrupted, echoing his words from days earlier. And I'm bundled up and medicated, and I want to see the snow, please. Ethan studied her face, then nodded. Let me get your coat. They bundled up like children preparing for a snowball fight. Layers of sweaters, heavy coats, gloves, scarves. Clara May felt ridiculous and wonderful at the same time. When was the last time she'd played in the snow? When was the last time she'd done anything just because she wanted to? The cold hit them as soon as they stepped outside, sharp and clean and invigorating. The snow was still falling, fat flakes that caught in Clara May's hair and melted on her cheeks. Ethan offered his arm and she took it, grateful for the support as they made their way down the porch steps. The world had been muffled by the snow. Their footsteps were the only sound, a soft crunching that seemed almost too loud in the stillness. They walked slowly toward the barn, Clara May's breath coming in visible puffs, her body already protesting the exertion. You okay? Ethan asked. I'm perfect, Clara May said, and meant it. Inside the barn, out of the wind, the temperature was marginally better. The horses nickered at their arrival. Dutch, the old gelding, pushed his nose against Ethan's shoulder, looking for treats. Sorry, boy, Ethan said, patting the horse's neck. Didn't bring anything this time. Clara May moved to Sunset's stall. The mare was standing calmly, her breath steaming in the cold air. Clara May reached out and stroked the white blaze on her face. She's gentle, Ethan said. Good for riders who haven't been on a horse in a while. Clara May looked at him. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Ethan said innocently. Just making an observation. I can barely walk to the barn without getting winded, Clara May pointed out. The horse does most of the work, Ethan countered. You just sit there and enjoy the ride. Clara May knew she should say no. It was reckless and foolish and probably dangerous given her condition. But standing there in the barn, with the snow falling outside and this man looking at her like she was still capable of adventure, she found herself nodding. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Ethan's face lit up with a grin that made him look 20 years younger. Huh? Yeah, Clara May confirmed. But if I fall off and die, I'm going to be very annoyed with you. Noted, Ethan said. He saddled Sunset with practiced efficiency while Clara May watched, remembering the mechanics of it. The blanket, the saddle, the cinch pulled tight but not too tight. The bridle slipped over the mare's ears. It was all coming back to her, muscle memory from a lifetime ago. Ethan led the horse outside and held the reins while Clara May approached. Getting on was going to be the hard part. Her body wasn't flexible like it used to be, and her strength was diminished by illness and medication. I'll give you a boost, Ethan said. Clara May put her left foot in the stirrup and felt Ethan's hands on her waist, strong and steady. With his help, she swung her right leg over and settled into the saddle. For a moment, she felt dizzy, the ground suddenly much farther away than she remembered. You good? Ethan asked, still holding the reins. Clara May gripped the saddle horn and took a breath, then another. The dizziness passed, replaced by something else, a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. I'm good, she said. Ethan handed her the reins and stepped back. Just walk her around the yard, nice and easy. If you feel uncomfortable at all, you stop. Understood? Understood, Clara May said. She clicked her tongue and gave Sunset a gentle nudge with her heels. The mare started forward, her gait smooth and easy. Clara May felt her body remember the rhythm of it, the sway and rock, the way her hips moved with the horse's motion. They made a slow circuit of the yard, Ethan watching with his arms crossed and a worried expression that he was trying to hide. But Clara May wasn't worried. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt truly alive. The cold air on her face, the powerful animal beneath her, the vast Montana sky stretching overhead. This was what she'd been missing in that sterile nursing home. This sense of connection to something bigger than her own slow decline. "Want to try going a little farther?" she called to Ethan. "Clara," he started. "Just to the oak tree and back," she said. "Please." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I'm coming with you." He disappeared into the barn and emerged moments later leading Dutch. He mounted with the ease of someone who'd been doing it his whole life, settling into the saddle like it was an extension of his own body. They rode side by side through the falling snow, two old people on old horses moving at a pace that wouldn't challenge a walking child. But to Clara May, it felt like flying. When they reached the oak tree, she pulled Sunset to a stop. Ethan stopped beside her. They sat in silence, looking back at the ranch house with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn with its weathered red paint, the fence lines disappearing into white. "This is where you proposed," Clara May said. "This is where you said yes," Ethan replied. "If we could go back," Clara May said slowly, "knowing what we know now, all the pain and the lost years and the misunderstanding, would you still ask me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He sat on his horse, his gloved hands resting on the saddle horn, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Yes," he said finally, "because even with all the pain, even with 50 years of thinking you'd left me, I never regretted loving you. The pain was real, but so was the love, and I'd rather have had both than neither." "Me too," Clara May whispered. They rode back to the barn in silence, a comfortable quiet that needed no words. Ethan helped her dismount, his hands steady as her legs trembled from the exertion. She was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, but it was a good exhaustion, the exhaustion of having lived, not just survived. "Thank you," she said as they unsaddled the horses. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For reminding me what it feels like to be brave," Clara May said. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara May brought up the subject they'd been dancing around since she arrived. "We need to talk about what happens when I get worse," she said. Ethan lowered the newspaper he'd been pretending to read. "Okay." "I don't want to go to a hospital," Clara May said. "I don't want machines and tubes and strangers. I want to be here for as long as possible, but I also don't want to be a burden. When it gets to the point where you can't handle it alone, we'll need to make other arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Ethan asked. "Hospice, maybe," Clara May said. "They can come here, help with the care. My daughters will want to be involved too, near the end. I need you to promise me you'll let them help, that you won't try to do everything yourself." Ethan set down the newspaper completely. "I took care of Margaret when she was dying. I know what it involves." "This is different," Clara May said gently. "Margaret was your wife. She paused, unsure how to finish that sentence. "You're the woman I love," Ethan said simply. "Then and now, that's what you are." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. "I love you too," Clara May said. "I never stopped, not even when I thought you were dead, not even when I loved William. You were always there, in the back of my heart, in the quiet moments. My first love, my great what if." Ethan crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch. He took her hands in his, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers, not from age or illness, but from emotion barely contained. "We can't get back the 50 years we lost," he said, "but we have right now, however long that is. And I'm not going to waste a minute of it wishing things were different." "Neither am I," Clara May said. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, his lips gentle against her skin. It was chaste and tender, and somehow more intimate than anything Clara May had experienced in years. "I'm scared," she admitted, "not of dying, but of leaving you again, of you having to bury another person you love." "I'm scared too," Ethan said, "but I'd rather have you here, even knowing how it ends, than live another day alone wondering what happened to you." They held each other as the fire burned down to embers, two people trying to compress a lifetime of love into whatever time remained. The next morning, Clara May woke to find blood on her pillow. Not much, just a small stain from where she'd bitten her lip in her sleep without realizing it. But it was enough to remind her that her body was failing, that time was running out faster than she wanted to acknowledge. She cleaned up before Ethan could see it, washing her face and changing the pillowcase. But at breakfast, she couldn't hide the fact that she was tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "Bad night?" Ethan asked. "Just the usual," Clara May said, trying to sound casual. "The medication makes me restless." Ethan studied her with the careful attention of someone who'd watched another person die slowly. "You're getting worse." It wasn't a question, so Clara May didn't pretend otherwise. "Yes," she said, "not dramatically, not yet. But yes." "What do you need?" Ethan asked. "I need you to understand that there are going to be bad days," Clara May said. "Days where I can't get out of bed. Days where the pain is too much to hide. Days where I'm not the person you remember, or even the person I was yesterday." "Okay," Ethan said. "And I need you to promise me that on those days you won't look at me with pity," Clara May continued. "I can handle a lot of things, but I can't handle being pitied." "I don't pity you," Ethan said firmly. "I admire you. You're dying and you rode a horse in the snow yesterday. You're the bravest person I know." Clara May felt tears sting her eyes. "I don't feel brave. I feel scared and tired and angry that this is how it ends." "Then be scared and tired and angry," Ethan said. "But don't apologize for it, and don't think for 1 second that it makes you less in my eyes." They finished breakfast in silence, but it was the kind of silence that comes from understanding, not distance. Later that day, as Clara May rested on the couch with a book she was too tired to actually read, Ethan's phone rang. She heard him answer it in the kitchen, his voice low and careful. "Yes, this is Ethan Caldwell," he said. "Yes, she's here." "She's fine." "No, I don't think that's necessary. I understand your concern, but she's an adult and she's made her choice." Clara May realized it must be one of her daughters. She got up slowly and walked to the kitchen doorway. Ethan saw her and held out the phone. "It's Patricia. She wants to talk to you." Clara May took the phone. "Hi, honey." "Mom, I've been thinking," Patricia said, her voice tight with worry. "Maybe I should come out there, stay with you for a while, help out." "That's sweet, but unnecessary," Clara May said. "Mom, you're dying," Patricia said bluntly. "You shouldn't be alone with some man you haven't seen in 50 years. What if something happens? What if—" "Patricia," Clara May interrupted gently but firmly, "I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you expected or wanted for me. But I'm not alone. I'm with someone who understands what I'm going through, someone who cares about me. And I'm happy here, honey. Really happy. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I want to be." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you in love with him?" Patricia asked finally. Clara May looked at Ethan, who was pretending to be absorbed in washing dishes but was clearly listening to every word. "Yes," Clara May said. "I am. I always have been." Another pause. "Then I'm happy for you, Mom," Patricia said, her voice thick with tears. "I really am, but I still want to come visit, meet him, make sure he's taking good care of you." "You can come visit," Clara May agreed. "Just give us a few more weeks. Let me settle in here first." They talked for a few more minutes about logistics and health updates before saying goodbye. Clara May handed the phone back to Ethan. "That went better than I expected," she said. "You told her you loved me," Ethan said. "I did," Clara May confirmed. "Do you?" he asked. "Still? After everything?" Clara May crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him, close enough to see the silver stubble on his jaw, the lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that came from emotion, not age. "I love you, Ethan Caldwell," she said clearly. "I loved you when we were young and stupid and thought we had forever. I loved you when I thought you were dead and mourned you like a widow. I loved you even when I loved William, in that secret place in my heart where first loves live. And I love you now, standing in your kitchen, knowing we only have weeks or maybe days left. I love you. I've always loved you. I will love you until my last breath and probably beyond it." Ethan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. I love you so much it terrifies me. Because I know how this ends, Clara. I know I'm going to lose you again, and this time there's no misunderstanding to blame. This time it's just death, pure and simple. Then we make the most of the time we have, Clara May said. We don't waste a single moment on fear or regret. We just love each other as hard as we can, for as long as we can. Ethan pulled her into his arms, and they stood that way for a long time, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a shifting world. That evening, after dinner, Ethan brought out an old photo album Clara May hadn't seen before. It was leather-bound and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Margaret made this, he explained, settling beside Clara May on the couch. She was always taking pictures, documenting everything. She said, "Memories fade, but photographs last." He opened the album to the first page. It showed a much younger Ethan standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Margaret. "That's from our wedding day," Ethan said. "New Year's Eve, 1977. It snowed that night. The Reverend almost couldn't make it to the church." Clara May studied the photograph. Margaret was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way. She wore a simple white dress and held a bouquet of winter flowers. But what struck Clara May most was the way she was looking at Ethan, with complete trust and affection. "She loved you very much," Clara May said. "She did," Ethan agreed, "and I loved her. But I need you to see something." He flipped through the pages, pictures of Christmases and birthdays, of Rachel as a baby and then a toddler, of the ranch in different seasons. Then he stopped on a page about halfway through. The photograph showed Ethan standing alone in a field, his back to the camera, facing east toward the rising sun. There was something in his posture, a loneliness, a longing, that was palpable even in the still image. "Margaret took this," Ethan said quietly. "It was our 10th anniversary. She got up early to make me breakfast and found me out in the pasture, just standing there, staring at nothing. She took this picture and then came out to ask me what I was thinking about." "What did you tell her?" Clara May asked. "I told her the truth," Ethan said, "that I was thinking about you, about what might have been. She didn't get angry. She just stood with me for a while, and then she said something I never forgot." "What did she say?" "She said that loving someone didn't mean you stopped thinking about the roads you didn't take," Ethan said. "She said it was okay to wonder, as long as I didn't forget to appreciate the road I was actually on. And then she took my hand and led me back to the house for breakfast." Clara May touched the photograph gently. "She was a remarkable woman." "She was," Ethan agreed. "And you know what? She would have liked you. She would have understood why you're here. She might have even encouraged it." "You think so?" Clara May asked. "I know so," Ethan said, "because the last thing she said to me before she died was, 'Don't spend the rest of your life alone. You have too much love in you to waste it on ghosts.'" "I'm literally a ghost," Clara May pointed out. "I've been dead to you for 50 years. "But you're here now," Ethan said. "That's what matters. You're here, and you're real, and I'm not wasting another moment of the time we have left." He closed the photo album and set it aside. Then he took both of Clara May's hands in his. "Marry me," he said. Clara May blinked, certain she'd heard wrong. "What?" "Marry me," Ethan repeated. "I know it's crazy. I know we're old and you're dying and it doesn't make any practical sense. But we were supposed to get married 50 years ago, and we didn't get to because the world got in the way. So marry me now. Let me make you my wife, even if it's just for a few weeks." "Ethan," Clara May said, her voice shaking, "I don't know if I can. My daughters—" "Will understand," Ethan interrupted, "or they won't. But this isn't about them. This is about us. About finishing what we started all those years ago." Clara May felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm dying." "I know," Ethan said. "You'll be a widower again within weeks," Clara May said. "I know," Ethan repeated. "Then why?" Clara May asked. "Because I want to," Ethan said simply. "Because I've spent 50 years regretting that I didn't get to marry you, and I don't want to spend whatever time I have left regretting that I didn't ask one more time." Clara May looked into his eyes, those same eyes that had looked at her with love and hope and promise 50 years ago beneath an oak tree. They were older now, weathered by time and loss, but they held the same truth. "Yes," she said. "Yes?" Ethan repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. Yes, I'll marry you, Clara May said, laughing through her tears. I'll marry you tomorrow if you can arrange it. I'll marry you today if there's a reverend available. I'll marry you right now, right here, with just the two of us, and whatever power binds promises together. Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, really kissed her, for the first time in 50 years. It was gentle and desperate and full of everything they'd lost and everything they were trying to reclaim. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. I'll call the courthouse tomorrow, Ethan said. See what we need to do. It might take a few days to get the license. I can wait a few days, Clara May said. I've waited 50 years. A few more days won't kill me. They both froze at her words, then burst into slightly hysterical laughter at the dark humor of it. Too soon? Clara May asked. Perfect timing, Ethan said. They spent the rest of the evening making plans. Nothing elaborate. They were too old and Clara May was too sick for anything fancy. Just a simple ceremony in the living room with a justice of the peace. Maybe Ethan's daughter Rachel could come. Maybe Clara May's daughters could be there too, if they wanted. I want to wear something nice, Clara May said. Not a wedding dress. That would be ridiculous at my age. But something pretty. Something that makes me feel like myself. We'll go into town tomorrow, Ethan said. Find you something. You hate shopping, Clara May said, remembering. I hated a lot of things when I was young, Ethan said, but I'm old enough now to know what's worth suffering through. And shopping for my bride's wedding outfit, that's worth it. My bride. The word sent a thrill through Clara May that she hadn't felt in decades. That night, as she lay in bed, Clara May thought about William. She hoped he would understand. She hoped he wouldn't see this as a betrayal of their 40 years together. But somehow, she thought he would understand. He'd known she'd loved someone before him. He'd made peace with it. Maybe, wherever he was now, he was happy that she'd found her way back to that first love, even if only for a little while. And Margaret. Clara May hoped Margaret would understand too, that she'd see this not as a replacement, but as a completion. Two people finally getting the ending they'd been denied. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside pristine and white and perfect. Clara May closed her eyes and let herself imagine tomorrow. The drive into town, the search for the perfect outfit, the courthouse paperwork, the countdown to a wedding she'd given up on 50 years ago. She was dying. That fact hadn't changed, but she was also getting married. And for tonight, that second fact seemed just as important as the first. The drive into Red Hollow took 40 minutes along roads that wound through hills still blanketed in fresh snow. Clara May sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's old pickup truck, watching the landscape roll past with a mixture of nostalgia and strangeness. This had been her home once, these fields and fences and forgotten farmhouses, but 50 years was a long time, and the Red Hollow she remembered had been replaced by something smaller, quieter, more resigned to its own irrelevance. It's changed, she said as they passed the ruins of what used to be the Patterson dairy farm. Everything changes, Ethan replied, his hands steady on the wheel. The Pattersons sold out in 1989. Big agriculture companies bought up most of the small operations around here. What's left is just us stubborn fools who'd rather go broke than leave. Are you broke? Clara May asked. Ethan smiled slightly. Not broke, but not wealthy either. The ranch makes enough to keep me fed and the bills paid. That's all I need. They drove through what remained of downtown Red Hollow, a main street that looked like it was slowly being reclaimed by prairie grass. Half the storefronts were empty, their windows dark and dusty. The diner that Clara May remembered was gone, replaced by a Dollar General. The movie theater where she and Ethan had seen their first film together was now a laundromat. But Mercer's department store was still there, somehow surviving when everything else had closed or moved on. The sign had been repainted at some point in the last few decades, but the building itself looked exactly as Clara May remembered. I can't believe it's still here, she said as Ethan pulled into a parking spot. Old man Mercer died in 2003, Ethan said. His daughter, Ellen, runs it now. She stocks mostly practical stuff, work clothes, boots, winter gear, but she's got a section in the back with dresses and such. Margaret used to shop here. They got out of this truck, and the cold hit Clara May like a physical force. She pulled her coat tighter and took Ethan's offered arm. The short walk from the truck to the store entrance left her slightly breathless, but she refused to show it. A bell chimed as they entered. The interior was warm and smelled of old wood and fabric softener. A woman in her 60s looked up from behind the counter, Ellen Mercer presumably. She had her father's sharp eyes and her mother's kind smile. "Ethan Caldwell," she said with genuine pleasure. "Haven't seen you in here since last Christmas." "Ellen," Ethan replied with a nod. "This is Clara May Bennett. We're looking for something nice for her to wear." Ellen's eyes moved to Clara May with undisguised curiosity. In a town this small, news traveled fast, and Clara May had no doubt that her arrival at Ethan's ranch had been noted and discussed. "Nice to meet you," Ellen said, coming around the counter. "What kind of occasion are we dressing for?" "A wedding," Clara May said, watching the woman's reaction. Ellen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Your wedding?" "Yes," Clara May confirmed. "To Ethan?" Ellen asked, looking between them. "That's the plan," Ethan said, his voice carrying a hint of defiance, as if he was daring Ellen to make an issue of it. But Ellen just smiled, a warm, knowing smile that softened her whole face. "Well then, let's find you something beautiful." She led Clara May to the back of the store, where a small collection of dresses hung on a rack. They weren't wedding dresses, nothing white or elaborate, but there were some lovely pieces in jewel tones and soft fabrics. "When's the ceremony?" Ellen asked, flipping through the hangers. "As soon as we can arrange it," Clara May said. "A few days, maybe a week?" "Short engagement," Ellen observed. "At our age, there's no point in waiting," Clara May replied. Ellen paused her search and looked at Clara May with eyes that had seen too many people come and go in this dying town. "Margaret was a good woman," she said quietly. "Ethan loved her well, but I remember when he came back from that cattle drive all those years ago, before Margaret. I remember the look on his face when he found out you'd married someone else." Clara May felt her throat tighten. "You remember that?" "This is a small town," Ellen said. "We remember everything, and we all thought it was a shame. Two young people who so clearly belonged together, kept apart by bad luck and worse timing." She pulled out a dress in deep emerald green. "But you're here now. That's what matters." The dress was perfect. Simple, but elegant, with long sleeves and a flowing skirt that would hide how thin Clara May had become. The color made her eyes look brighter, less faded. "Try it on," Ellen urged, directing her to a small changing room. Clara May undressed slowly, careful of the ports and bandages that marked her body's betrayal. The dress slipped over her head easily, the fabric soft against her skin. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back wasn't dying, or at least the dying wasn't the first thing you noticed. The first thing you noticed was the dress, the color, the way it made her look almost young again. She stepped out of the changing room to find Ethan waiting. His expression when he saw her made everything, the exhausting trip to town, the pain she was hiding, the effort of staying upright, worth it. "Clara," he breathed. "You like it?" she asked, turning slightly. "You're beautiful," Ethan said simply. Ellen appeared with a delicate shawl in cream-colored lace. "This would go perfectly with it. Keep you warm, too. It's still cold out." Clara May accepted the shawl and draped it over her shoulders. The transformation was complete. She looked like a bride, not a young bride full of future and promise, but a bride nonetheless. "We'll take both," Ethan said. "And you'll need something too," Ellen said to Ethan. "Can't have the bride looking lovely while the groom shows up in ranch clothes." "I've got a suit at home," Ethan protested. "From 1985, Ellen said dryly. "Let me show you what I've got." 30 minutes later, they left Mercer's with Clara May's dress and shawl carefully wrapped in tissue paper and a new shirt and tie for Ethan that Ellen had insisted he needed. As they loaded the packages into the truck, Ellen called out from the doorway. "Congratulations," she said. I mean that. Whatever time you have together, make it count." "We will," Clara May promised. Their next stop was the courthouse, a squat brick building that housed what remained of Red Hollow's civic infrastructure. Inside, a bored clerk looked up from her computer as they approached the counter. "Help you?" she asked. "We need a marriage license," Ethan said. The clerk pulled out a form and a pen. "Names?" They went through the process, filling out forms, providing identification, answering questions about previous marriages and current addresses. The clerk was efficient and impersonal, processing their request like it was no different from a dog license or a building permit. "There's a 3-day waiting period," she said, stamping the paperwork. "You can pick up the license on Friday. Then you'll need an officiant, judge, justice of the peace, clergy member. The license is good for 30 days after that." "Friday," Clara May repeated. 3 days. She had 3 days to prepare to marry the man she'd loved for 50 years. "You both look old enough to know what you're doing," the clerk said, which was probably the closest thing to congratulations they'd get from her. "Good luck." Back in the truck, heading home, Clara May felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The trip had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. She leaned her head against the window, watching the landscape blur past. "You okay?" Ethan asked, glancing over at her. "Tired," Clara May admitted, "but happy." "We can rest when we get home," Ethan said. "I'll make lunch. You put your feet up." "Sounds perfect," Clara May murmured. But when they arrived back at the ranch, they found they had a visitor. A rental car sat in the driveway, and a woman in her mid-40s was sitting on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Rachel," Ethan said, surprise and wariness mixing in his voice. The woman stood as they got out of the truck. She had Ethan's eyes and what must have been Margaret's build, tall and solid, built for endurance rather than speed. "Hi, Dad," she said. "I wasn't expecting you," Ethan said, moving to help Clara May out of the truck. "I know," Rachel said. "I probably should have called, but I got your voicemail about—" She stopped, her eyes moving to Clara May. "About this." Clara May felt herself being assessed and tried not to feel defensive. This was Ethan's daughter. Of course she was protective. Of course she had questions. "You must be Clara May," Rachel said, stepping forward and offering her hand. "I'm Rachel." "Nice to meet you," Clara May said, shaking the offered hand. Rachel's grip was firm but not aggressive. "Let's go inside," Ethan said. "No point standing in the cold." Inside, with coffee made and coats hung up, the three of them sat in the living room with the awkwardness of strangers trying to find common ground. Rachel kept looking between her father and Clara May like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "So," Rachel said finally, "you're getting married." "We are," Ethan confirmed. "On Friday," Rachel added. "That's the plan," Ethan said. Rachel set down her coffee cup. "Dad, can we talk? Privately?" Ethan looked at Clara May, who nodded. "I'll go rest in my room," Clara May said, standing. "Give you two some time." "You don't have to," Ethan started. "It's fine," Clara May said. "Really?" She left them in the living room and retreated to the guest room, closing the door but unable to avoid hearing the raised voices that followed. "Dad, what are you thinking?" Rachel's voice carried clearly through the walls. "You barely know this woman." "I've known her longer than I knew your mother when we got married," Ethan replied, his voice tight. "That was different. You were young. This is... Dad, she's dying." "I know she's dying," Ethan said. "Then why would you set yourself up for that kind of pain again?" Rachel demanded. "You just got through losing Mom 8 years ago. Do you really want to go through that again so soon?" "It's not about wanting to go through it," Ethan said. "It's about not wanting to waste the time we have left." "But why marriage?" Rachel pressed. "Why can't you just, I don't know, spend time together without making it legal?" "Because we were supposed to get married 50 years ago," Ethan said, his voice rising. "Because she's the woman I proposed to under that oak tree out front, and I never got to make good on that promise. Because I love her, Rachel. I loved her then. I loved her in all the years between, and I love her now. And I'm not going to let her die without making her my wife." There was a long silence. "You never stopped loving her," Rachel said quietly. "All these years, even with Mom, you never stopped." "I loved your mother," Ethan said firmly. "Don't ever doubt that. Margaret was the best thing that happened to me after I lost Clara. But yes, there was always a part of me that wondered, what if? And now I don't have to wonder anymore." "Does she feel the same way?" Rachel asked. "Yes," Ethan said. Another silence, then Rachel's voice again, softer now. "I just don't want to see you hurt, Dad." "I know," Ethan said. "But I'm 73 years old. I don't have time to protect myself from hurt anymore. I'd rather have a few weeks of happiness and then grief than live the rest of my life safe and alone. Clara May heard footsteps, then the sound of Rachel crying and Ethan comforting her. She felt intrusive listening, so she moved to the far side of the room and looked out the window at the snow-covered pasture. She understood Rachel's concerns. They were valid, reasonable, protective. But Clara May had also heard the conviction in Ethan's voice when he'd defended their decision, and it warmed something deep inside her. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," Clara May called. Rachel entered, her eyes red but her expression calmer. "Can we talk?" "Of course," Clara May said, gesturing to the chair by the window. Rachel sat, her hands clasped in her lap. "I'm sorry if I upset you. I'm not trying to interfere." "You're protecting your father," Clara May said. "I understand. I have 3 daughters myself. They've had similar concerns." "He really loves you," Rachel said. "I really love him," Clara May replied. Rachel studied her for a long moment. "Tell me about it. The first time, when you were young." So Clara May told her. About the proposal under the oak tree, the plans they'd made, the cattle drive and the flooded river, the lies that had separated them. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from skepticism to sadness to something like understanding. "That's terrible," Rachel said when Clara May finished. "All those years lost because of misunderstanding." "Yes," Clara May agreed. "And now you're both dying," Rachel said bluntly. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon. You probably have weeks, maybe a couple of months. Dad probably has years, but who knows at that age?" "Yes," Clara May said again. "So why not just live together?" Rachel asked. "Why the legal marriage?" Clara May considered the question carefully. "Because we were robbed of it the first time. Because marriage means something, even at our age, maybe especially at our age. It's a promise, a commitment, a public declaration that we belong to each other. And because I want to die as Ethan Caldwell's wife. I want that to be true, legally and in every other way." Rachel's eyes filled with tears again. "Mom would have understood this. She always said Dad had a great love before her. She said it didn't diminish what they had. It was just part of who he was." "Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary person," Clara May said. "She was," Rachel said. She wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Okay, if you're going to marry my father on Friday, then we should do it right. Have you thought about flowers, music? Who's going to officiate?" Clara May blinked at the sudden shift. No, we haven't gotten that far." "Then let me help," Rachel said. "Please, let me do this for both of you." Over the next 3 days, Rachel transformed the ranch house. She brought in flowers, simple wildflowers and greenery that looked like they belonged in this landscape. She found a justice of the peace willing to drive out from the next county. She called Clara May's daughters and invited them to attend if they could make it on short notice. Patricia and Sarah both made arrangements to fly on Thursday night. Only the middle daughter, Jennifer, couldn't make it due to work obligations, but she sent her love and a gift, a vintage cameo brooch that had belonged to Clara May's grandmother. Thursday evening, the house was full of women. Rachel, Patricia, and Sarah moved through the rooms with the easy camaraderie of people united in a common purpose. They cooked dinner together, shared stories about their respective parents, and gradually built bridges across the decades of separation. Ethan had escaped to the barn, claiming the horses needed attention, but really just giving the women space to do whatever mysterious things women did before weddings. Clara May sat at the kitchen table, watching her daughters work alongside Ethan's daughter, and felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. These women existed because she and Ethan had loved other people, built other lives. But they were here now, helping to build this new thing, this late-blooming marriage that shouldn't make sense but somehow did. "Mom, you should rest," Patricia said, noticing Clara May's pallor. "Tomorrow's a big day." "I'm fine," Clara May protested, but even she could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Bed," Sarah said firmly. "Doctor's orders, and I'm a pediatrician, so I know what I'm talking about." "I treat children, not dying old women," Clara May pointed out. "The principle is the same," Sarah said with a smile. "Rest, fluids, and don't argue with me." Clara May allowed herself to be led to her room. Rachel had already been in there, placing a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser and laying out the green dress for tomorrow. The room smelled of lavender and possibility. "Are you happy, Mom?" Patricia asked quietly as she helped Clara May into bed. "Happier than I've been in years," Clara May said honestly. "Even knowing how it ends?" Patricia pressed. "Especially knowing how it ends," Clara May said. "Because for the first time in 50 years, I'm not running from the ending. I'm not pretending it's not coming or trying to squeeze a few more days out of denial. I'm just living right now, in this moment, with the man I love. And tomorrow I get to marry him. How could I not be happy?" Patricia kissed her forehead. "Then I'm happy for you. We all are." After her daughters left, Clara May lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the wind outside, the distant whinny of a horse. Tomorrow she would become Clara May Caldwell. She tested the name in her mind, rolling it around like a prayer or a promise. She must have dozed off because when she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the curtains. Her wedding day. The day she'd waited 50 years for. Clara May got out of bed slowly, assessing the damage. The pain was there, persistent and demanding, but manageable with medication. She took her pills, washed her face, and studied herself in the mirror. An old woman looked back, yes, but also a bride. She could be both. Breakfast was chaotic in the best possible way. Rachel made pancakes while Sarah brewed coffee, and Patricia set the table. Ethan appeared from the barn, freshly showered and nervous in a way Clara May found endearing. "You sleep okay?" he asked, finding a moment alone with her in the hallway. "Better than I expected," Clara May said. "You?" "Barely slept at all," Ethan admitted. "Kept thinking about today, about how we're really doing this." "Cold feet?" Clara May asked, only half joking. "Warm feet," Ethan said. "On fire feet. Can't wait another minute feet." Clara May laughed and kissed his cheek. "Good. Me too." The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon, late enough for everyone to prepare, early enough to catch the good light. Rachel and the sisters shooed Ethan out of the house so they could help Clara May get ready. Getting dressed was a production. The green dress, the cream shawl, the cameo brooch pinned carefully at her throat. Patricia did her makeup, subtle, natural, just enough to bring color to her pale cheeks. Sarah arranged her silver hair, pinning it up in a way that was elegant but not too formal. "You look beautiful, Mom," Patricia said, her eyes shining with tears. "I feel beautiful," Clara May said, and she meant it. The woman in the mirror was dying, yes, but she was also living. She was also about to marry the love of her life. At 10 minutes to 2, Rachel came to get her. "Everyone's ready. Dad's waiting in the living room. He looks like he might pass out from nerves, which is adorable." "How do I look?" Clara May asked. "Like a bride," Rachel said simply. "Come on, let's get you married." The living room had been transformed. The furniture had been pushed back to create an aisle. Wildflowers decorated every surface. The justice of the peace, an elderly man named Herman who'd known both Ethan and Margaret, stood by the fireplace, smiling kindly. And at the end of the aisle, standing straight and tall in his new shirt and the tie Ellen had picked out, was Ethan. His eyes met hers across the room, and Clara May saw in them everything she'd been missing for 50 years. Love, recognition, home. Sarah took one arm, Patricia took the other, and together they walked Clara May down the aisle she'd thought she'd never walk. It was only about 15 feet, the length of a living room, but it felt like crossing a continent. When they reached Ethan, her daughters stepped back and Clara May took both his hands in hers. They were shaking, both their hands trembling with age and emotion and the sheer improbability of this moment. "Dearly beloved," Herman began, his voice warm and certain. "We are gathered here today to witness the joining of Ethan James Caldwell and Clara May Bennett in holy matrimony." Clara May barely heard the words. She was too focused on Ethan's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Do you, Ethan, take Clara May to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Herman asked. "I do," Ethan said, his voice strong despite the tears streaming down his face. "I have for 50 years. I do now. I will until my last breath. And do you, Clara May, take Ethan to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara May squeezed Ethan's hands. "I do," I've been his in my heart since I was 23 years old. Now I get to be his in truth. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Montana, Herman said, smiling through his own tears, I pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan cupped Clara May's face in his weathered hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious and breakable. Clara May kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears, and feeling joy so complete it was almost painful. When they pulled apart, Rachel, Patricia, and Sarah were applauding and crying. Herman was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, and Clara May was laughing, deep, genuine laughter that came from somewhere she'd thought had died years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Herman announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Caldwell. Mrs. Caldwell. Clara May tested the name in her mind and found it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting there all along. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of celebration. Rachel had ordered a small cake from the bakery in town. Nothing fancy, just white cake with buttercream frosting, but it was perfect. They ate dinner together, all five of them crowded around the kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something that should have happened decades ago finally coming to pass. As evening fell, Patricia and Sarah prepared to head to their hotel in town. Rachel would stay at the ranch in what had been her childhood bedroom. Tomorrow they would all leave, returning to their own lives, but for tonight they lingered. Thank you, Clara May said to her daughters as they prepared to go. For being here. For understanding. Thank you for showing us it's never too late for love, Sarah said, hugging her carefully. After they left, after Rachel had retired to her room, Ethan and Clara May sat together on the porch despite the cold. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. We did it, Clara May said, her hand in Ethan's. We did, Ethan agreed. 50 years late, but we did it. Do you think we would have been happy? Clara May asked. If we'd gotten married back then, when we were young and stupid and thought we had forever? Ethan considered the question. I think we would have had hard times, money troubles, arguments, all the things that come with building a life together. But yes, I think we would have been happy. Different happy than we were with Margaret and William, but happy nonetheless. I think so too, Clara May said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Clara May felt the pain in her body, the exhaustion, the reminder that her time was running out, but she also felt Ethan's hand in hers, the gold band on her finger that marked her as his wife, and the peace that came from finally being exactly where she belonged. I'm tired, she admitted eventually. Let's get you to bed, Ethan said. He helped her up, and they walked inside together. At the door to the guest room, which was still her room, at least for tonight, Clara May paused. I'm your wife now, she said. You are, Ethan confirmed. Then I should sleep in my husband's room, Clara May said. Ethan's expression shifted to concern. Clara, you don't have to. I want to, Clara May interrupted. Not for, I'm too sick for anything except sleep. But I want to fall asleep beside you. I want to wake up next to you. I've waited 50 years for that. Please don't make me wait another night. Ethan's eyes filled with tears again. Okay, he whispered. He led her to his room, their room now, and helped her change into her nightgown. They got into bed together, Clara May curling against his side, his arm around her shoulders. Thank you, she said into the darkness. For what? Ethan asked. For asking me again, Clara May said. For not giving up on us, even after 50 years. I could never give up on you, Ethan said. You were always there, in every sunset, every empty chair, every moment I thought I was content alone. You were always there. I love you, Ethan Caldwell, Clara May said. I love you too, Mrs. Caldwell, Ethan replied. Clara May closed her eyes and let herself sink into sleep, safe and warm, and finally home, in the arms of the man she'd loved for 50 years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The days ahead would be hard. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged. Tonight she was Ethan Caldwell's wife, and that was enough. Clara May woke to golden light streaming through the bedroom window, painting everything in shades of honey and amber. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she felt the warmth of Ethan's body beside her, his arms still draped protectively across her waist, and memory flooded back. She was married. She was Mrs. Caldwell. She had fallen asleep as Ethan's wife and awakened the same way. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and studied his face in the morning light. Sleep had smoothed away some of the tension he carried during waking hours. His breathing was deep and even, peaceful in a way that made Clara May's chest ache with tenderness. This man had waited 50 years for her without even knowing he was waiting. This man had opened his home and his heart to her dying body and her complicated past. This man loved her. As if sensing her gaze, Ethan's eyes opened. For a second, he looked confused, then his face broke into a smile so genuine it transformed him. "Morning, Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," Clara May replied, testing out the words. They felt right, like coming home after a long journey. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked, his hand moving to her cheek. Clara May took inventory. The pain was there, persistent as always, maybe a little worse than yesterday. But beneath it, around it, despite it, she felt something else. Contentment. Peace. Joy. "Happy," she said simply. They lay there for a while longer, neither wanting to break the spell of this first morning as husband and wife, but eventually the sounds of Rachel moving around in the kitchen pulled them from bed. They dressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and zippers like teenagers fumbling through their first intimate moments. In the kitchen, Rachel had made a feast: eggs, bacon, toast, fresh coffee, even pancakes. She looked up as they entered, a knowing smile on her face. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," she said. "How does it feel to be newlyweds?" "Strange," Ethan admitted, pouring coffee. "Good strange." "The best strange," Clara May added, settling at the table with a carefulness that didn't escape Rachel's notice. Over breakfast, Rachel outlined her plan. She needed to return to Seattle that afternoon, work obligations she couldn't postpone any longer, but she wanted to make sure everything was arranged before she left. "I've contacted a hospice service that operates in this area," Rachel said, looking primarily at Clara May. "They can send a nurse out twice a week to check on you, help manage pain, provide support. I also found the number for a home health aid service if you need more regular assistance." "Rachel, that's not necessary," Clara May started. "It is necessary," Rachel interrupted gently but firmly. "Dad's strong and capable, but he can't do this alone. And you shouldn't have to feel like a burden because you need help. This is what these services exist for." Clara May looked at Ethan, who nodded. "She's right. I want to take care of you, but I also want to do it right. That means accepting help when we need it." "Okay," Clara May agreed. "Thank you, Rachel." After breakfast, while Ethan was out checking on the horses, Rachel sat with Clara May at the kitchen table. "Can I ask you something personal?" Rachel said. "Of course," Clara May replied. "How much time do the doctors think you have?" Clara May appreciated the directness. "They said 6 months when they first diagnosed me. That was 4 months ago, so probably 2 months, maybe less. It's hard to say exactly." Rachel nodded slowly, processing this. "And you're in pain?" "Yes," Clara May said honestly. "The medication helps, but yes, there's pain." "Does Dad know how bad it is?" "He knows I'm dying," Clara May said. "He knows it won't be easy, but I don't think anyone can really know how bad it might get until we're in the middle of it." Rachel reached across the table and took Clara May's hand. "I'm glad he has you. I know that probably sounds strange, given the circumstances, but after Mom died, he was so alone. He went through all the right motions, eating, sleeping, maintaining the ranch, but there was no light in him. And now, even knowing what's coming, there's light again. You gave him that." "He gave it back to me," Clara May said, tears pricking her eyes. "I was dying alone in a nursing home, just waiting for the end. And now I'm here, married to the man I've loved my whole life, and every day feels like a gift." They hugged, these two women connected by their love for the same man, and when they pulled apart, both were crying and smiling at the same time. Rachel left after lunch, making Ethan and Clara May promise to call if they needed anything at all. She hugged her father for a long time, whispering something in his ear that made him nod and wipe his eyes. "What did she say?" Clara May asked after Rachel's rental car had disappeared down the long driveway. She said Mom would have approved, Ethan said, his voice thick. She said to love you hard and not waste a single moment on regret. Smart girl, Clara May said. She gets it from her mother, Ethan replied. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, different from before the wedding, but no less comfortable. They were husband and wife now, and that changed things in subtle ways. They moved through the house with more ease, more certainty in their place in each other's lives. Ethan no longer hesitated before taking Clara May's hand or putting his arm around her shoulders. Clara May no longer felt like a guest who needed permission to rearrange the kitchen or choose what to make for dinner. They talked about everything and nothing. Ethan told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his father's stern wisdom and his mother's quiet strength. Clara May shared memories of her daughters as children, the chaos and joy of raising 3 girls while trying to maintain some sense of herself. They talked about Margaret and William without jealousy or bitterness, honoring the lives they'd built with other people while acknowledging the life they were building now. One afternoon, about a week after the wedding, Clara May was resting on the couch when she heard Ethan on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low and serious, the tone he used for difficult conversations. I understand, he was saying. Yes, she knows. We're prepared for that. Okay. Thank you. He came into the living room, his expression carefully neutral. That was the hospice coordinator, he said, settling into his recliner. They're sending a nurse out tomorrow to do an initial assessment. Already? Clara May asked. Rachel set it up before she left, Ethan said. The coordinator said it's better to establish care early, so everyone knows what to expect as things progress. Clara May nodded, understanding the logic even as she hated the reminder of what was coming. Okay. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, Ethan said quickly. This is just an assessment. We're just gathering information. I know, Clara May said. It's fine. It's good, actually. Better to be prepared. The nurse who came the next day was a woman in her 50s named Janet, with kind eyes and capable hands. She spent an hour with Clara May, checking vital signs, reviewing medications, asking questions about pain levels and symptoms. Ethan hovered nervously until Janet shooed him out to make tea. How are you really doing? Janet asked once they were alone. Honestly? Clara May said. Some days are better than others. The pain is manageable most of the time, but it's getting worse. I get tired easily. I don't have much appetite. That's all normal for where you are in the progression, Janet said gently. The important thing is that you're not suffering unnecessarily. We can adjust your pain medication if needed. We can also talk about other interventions that might help with quality of life. How long? Clara May asked. She hadn't meant to ask, but the question came out anyway. Janet was quiet for a moment, her expression compassionate but honest. It's hard to say exactly. Based on what you're describing and what I'm seeing, I'd say you have maybe 4 to 6 weeks. Could be more, could be less. Bodies don't follow predictable timelines. 4 to 6 weeks. Clara May let the number settle into her consciousness. A month. Maybe a little more. Not long, but longer than she'd feared. Thank you, she said, for being honest. Of course, Janet said. Now I'm going to recommend twice-weekly visits to start. We'll monitor your symptoms, adjust medications as needed, and make sure both you and your husband have the support you need. Does that sound acceptable? Yes, Clara May said. When Ethan came back with tea, Janet spent another 30 minutes going over care plans with both of them. She was matter-of-fact but not cold, explaining what changes they might expect, what symptoms to watch for, when to call for help. Ethan listened intently, asking questions, taking mental notes. After Janet left, they sat together in the living room, the weight of her visit hanging between them. 4 to 6 weeks, Ethan said quietly. Give or take, Clara May confirmed. Ethan reached for her hand. Then we make every day count. No more holding back, no more being careful with feelings or words. We say what we need to say, we do what we want to do, and we don't waste time worrying about tomorrow. Agreed, Clara May said. That night, Clara May asked Ethan to tell her about the land on the Eastern Ridge, the land he'd planned to buy for them 50 years ago. I never bought it, Ethan admitted. After you married William, it felt wrong somehow, like I'd be building a shrine to what I'd lost. so I let it go. Someone else bought it in the 80s, built a house on it. They moved away about 10 years ago. The house is empty now. Can we go see it? Clara May asked. Tomorrow? It's a bit of a drive, Ethan said cautiously. And the road's rough. I don't care, Clara May said. I want to see what we would have built our life on. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp November day that made everything look sharp-edged and vivid. They bundled up and drove out in Ethan's truck, heading east toward the ridge that rose like a promise against the horizon. The road was indeed rough, barely more than a pair of tire tracks cutting through prairie grass. But eventually they crested the ridge, and Clara May caught her breath. The view was spectacular. To the east, the prairie stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. To the west, they could see Ethan's ranch, small and neat in the distance. The land itself was perfect, gently rolling, with good grass and a small creek cutting through the northern section. The house that had been built there was abandoned now, windows broken and roof sagging. But Clara May could see past its current state to what it might have been. "This is where you wanted to build?" she asked. "Right here," Ethan confirmed. "I had it all planned out. The house would face east to catch the sunrise, barn to the north to block the wind, corrals and gardens and space for children to run." Clara May closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. A younger Ethan building a house with his own hands. Herself, heavy with their first child, watching from the porch. Children, 3, maybe 4, running through tall grass with dogs at their heels. Growing old together in this place, their bones eventually resting in earth they'd claimed as their own. "It would have been beautiful," she said. "It would have," Ethan agreed. They stood there for a long time, two old people mourning a life that had never existed except in imagination. But Clara May found she wasn't sad, exactly. Yes, they'd lost this future. But they'd also gained other things, children and grandchildren who existed because they'd loved other people, experiences and hardships that had shaped them, the wisdom that came only from living. "No regrets," she said, echoing their agreement. "No regrets," Ethan confirmed. On the way back, Clara May fell asleep in the truck, her head against the window. When they got home, Ethan carried her inside. She weighed so little now, barely more than a child, and laid her gently on their bed. She woke briefly, smiled at him, and drifted back to sleep. Ethan stood watching her for a long moment, memorizing the lines of her face, the rise and fall of her breathing, the way the afternoon light caught in her silver hair. He was losing her. He'd just found her again, and he was losing her. The unfairness of it made him want to rage at the universe, but what would be the point? The universe didn't care about fairness. The following weeks brought a steady decline that was gentle at first, then more pronounced. Clara May's good days became rarer. She slept more, ate less, needed help with things she'd been doing independently just days before. Janet came twice a week as promised, adjusting medications, offering quiet support. Patricia came to visit again, staying for 3 days. She and Ethan took turns sitting with Clara May, reading to her, talking to her, just being present. Sarah called every other day, and even Jennifer managed a weekend visit. The daughters were preparing themselves for the inevitable, saying the things that needed to be said while there was still time. Through it all, Ethan was a constant presence. He helped Clara May dress and bathe when she needed it, never making her feel diminished by her dependence. He carried her to the porch when she wanted to see the sunset. He held her through the bad nights when pain broke through the medications and she cried from frustration and fear. One evening, about 5 weeks after the wedding, Clara May asked Ethan to help her outside. The sunset was particularly spectacular, the sky aflame with orange and purple and gold. They sat in the porch chairs, bundled in blankets against the cold, watching the light show nature provided. "I'm glad I came here," Clara May said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad I was brave enough to find you." "I'm glad you did too," Ethan said, his hand finding hers under the blankets. "Promise me something," Clara May said. "Anything," Ethan replied. "When I'm gone, don't spend the rest of your life mourning," Clara May said. "You've mourned me for 50 years already. That's enough. I want you to remember me, but I want you to keep living too, really living, not just going through the motions." "Clara," Ethan started, his voice breaking. "Promise me," Clara May insisted. Promise me you'll laugh and ride your horses and watch sunsets and maybe even fall in love again if the opportunity presents itself. Promise me you won't turn into a ghost haunting this ranch. I promise, Ethan said, tears streaming down his face. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to lose you again and keep living. The same way you did before, Clara May said. One day at a time, one foot in front of the other. You'll grieve. I want you to grieve, but then you'll heal. And you'll remember that you had love twice with two different women, and that's more than most people ever get. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving them in twilight. Ethan helped Clara May back inside and settled her in their bed. She was so weak now, barely able to walk even with assistance. Will you lie with me? She asked. Always, Ethan said. He climbed into bed beside her and she curled against him the way she had every night since the wedding. Tell me about tomorrow, she said. It had become their ritual. Ethan would describe what he planned for the next day. Simple things like feeding the horses or fixing a fence, and Clara May would listen and imagine being part of it. Tomorrow I'm going to make you pancakes for breakfast, Ethan said. The kind with blueberries that you like. Then maybe we'll sit by the fire and I'll read to you from that book you've been enjoying. Dutch needs his hooves trimmed, so I'll do that in the afternoon. And tomorrow night, if you're feeling up to it, we'll have dinner on the good china that Margaret left us. Because every day with you deserves to be special. That sounds perfect, Clara May murmured, already drifting toward sleep. I love you, Ethan said into the darkness. I love you too, Clara May replied. Always have. Always will. She fell asleep in his arms, her breathing shallow but steady. Ethan held her and tried to memorize everything, the weight of her against him, the smell of her hair, the sound of her breathing. He knew, with the certainty that comes from having watched someone die before, that time was running out. When Clara May woke the next morning, she couldn't get out of bed. The weakness had progressed overnight, stealing what little strength she had left. Ethan helped her sit up, propped against pillows, and brought her water and medication. I think this is it, she said calmly. I think these are my last days. I'll call Janet, Ethan said. And your daughters? Not yet, Clara May said. Let me have one more day with just you. Tomorrow you can call them. But today, I want it to be just us. So Ethan canceled his plans for the day and spent it entirely with Clara May. He brought breakfast on a tray, pancakes as promised, though she could only manage a few bites. He read to her from her favorite book. He held her hand and told her stories about their youth, about the county fairs they'd attended together, and the dreams they'd shared. When Clara May dozed in the afternoon, Ethan sat beside the bed and watched her sleep, committing every detail to memory. This woman had shaped his entire life. She'd been his first love, his great loss, his impossible reunion, and now his wife. Loving her had defined him in ways he was still discovering. That evening, as the sun set in spectacular fashion once again, Clara May asked Ethan to carry her to the window so she could see it. It's beautiful, she breathed, watching the sky burn. Not as beautiful as you, Ethan said, and meant it. To him, she would always be the girl under the oak tree, saying yes before he'd finished asking the question. Thank you, Clara May said. For what? Ethan asked. For giving me this, Clara May said, gesturing weakly at the room, the ranch, him. For letting me die as your wife instead of alone in that nursing home. For loving me enough to forgive 50 years of misunderstanding. For making my last weeks the happiest I've had in years. Thank you for coming back to me, Ethan said, for being brave enough to find the truth. For choosing to spend your last days here, with me. They sat together as darkness fell, not talking, just being present with each other. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Clara May struggling to breathe. He called Janet immediately, then Patricia. Within hours, the house was full again, all three daughters arriving in a rush of tears and suitcases, Janet setting up equipment and adjusting medications to keep Clara May comfortable. For 2 more days, Clara May drifted in and out of consciousness. Her daughters took turns sitting with her, holding her hand, telling her it was okay to let go. Ethan was there constantly, leaving her side only when forced. On the 3rd day, Clara May woke with unusual clarity. Her eyes focused on Ethan's face and she smiled. There you are, she whispered. Here I am, Ethan confirmed, taking her hand. Always. The girls? Clara May asked. They're here, Ethan said. Do you want to see them? In a minute, Clara May said. First, I need to tell you something. Okay, Ethan said. Loving you was the best thing I ever did, Clara May said, each word an effort. Even with all the pain and the lost years, I would do it all again, every moment, just to end up here with you as your wife, as... Me too, Ethan said, tears blurring his vision. Every moment, every heartbreak, it all led me back to you. Kiss me, Clara May said. Ethan leaned down and kissed her gently, carefully, like she was made of glass. When he pulled back, Clara May was smiling. Perfect, she said. She saw her daughters then, each one coming to the bedside to say goodbye. They told her they loved her, that she'd been a good mother, that they'd take care of each other. Clara May listened with tears in her eyes, squeezing each hand as strongly as she could manage. As afternoon faded to evening, Clara May's breathing became more labored. Janet checked her vital signs and looked at Ethan meaningfully. It was time. Can we have a moment? Ethan asked the daughters. They nodded, kissed their mother one last time, and left the room. Ethan climbed into bed beside Clara May, gathering her carefully into his arms. She was so small now, so fragile, barely there at all. I'm here, he said. I've got you. Ethan? Clara May breathed. I'm here, love, Ethan repeated. You're safe, you're loved, and you're my wife. You're Clara May Caldwell, and you're the love of my life. Clara May's breathing became shallower. Ethan held her closer, his tears falling into her hair. It's okay, he whispered. You can let go. I'll be okay. You don't have to hold on for me. Clara May's eyes opened one last time, finding his face. Love you, she managed. I love you too, Ethan said. I'll love you forever. I'll love you until we meet again. And we will meet again, Clara. I promise you that. Clara May smiled, a beautiful, peaceful smile that erased all the pain and fear. And then, with the last light of sunset painting the room in gold, with Ethan's arms around her and his voice in her ear telling her how loved she was, Clara May Bennett Caldwell took one final breath and let it out slowly. She was gone. Ethan held her for a long time, rocking her gently, crying into her hair, saying goodbye to the woman he'd loved for 50 years. The daughters came back eventually, crying quietly, but they gave him space to grieve. Later, much later, after the hospice workers had come and gone, after Clara May's body had been taken away, after the daughters had finally gone to bed exhausted, Ethan stood on the porch alone, looking out at the dark prairie. The pain was enormous, crushing, the kind of grief that made breathing difficult. But underneath it, threaded through it like gold through rock, was gratitude. He'd had 6 weeks with Clara May as his wife, 6 weeks of love and truth and completion, 6 weeks to say the things that needed saying and heal the wounds of 50 years. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was more than he'd had any right to hope for when she'd appeared under that oak tree 6 weeks ago. Ethan looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched over him and Clara May when they were young and foolish and thought they had forever. Thank you, he said to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought her back to him. Thank you for giving her back to me, even if just for a little while. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of winter and endings and the promise of spring still months away. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, and made himself a promise. He would grieve Clara May. He would mourn her properly, the way she deserved. But then he would live, really live, the way she'd made him promise. He would ride his horses and watch sunsets and remember her with joy instead of just sorrow. Because loving Clara May Bennett twice, 50 years apart, had taught him that love wasn't diminished by loss. It was enlarged by it. Every moment with her, from that first day under the oak tree to her last breath in his arms, had been a gift. And the proper way to honor a gift wasn't to lock it away in grief, but to let it change you, strengthen you, remind you what it meant to be truly alive. Ethan went back inside, closed the door against the cold, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom that had been theirs for 6 precious weeks. He didn't change the sheets. Not yet. Tomorrow, maybe. But tonight he wanted to sleep surrounded by her scent, her presence, the ghost of her warmth. He lay down on her side of the bed where she had slept every night since their wedding and closed his eyes. "Good night, Clara May," he whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for being my wife. Thank you for showing me that even at 73, even when death is knocking at the door, there's still room for love." And as Ethan drifted towards sleep, exhausted by grief and gratitude in equal measure, he could have sworn he felt her hand in his one last time, warm and real and promising that this wasn't really goodbye. It was just until we meet again. The prairie wind whispered through the eaves, carrying with it the memory of a young woman's laughter and an old woman's peace. And somewhere in the distance, beneath an oak tree that had witnessed both a beginning and an ending, the earth held its secrets close and waited patiently for spring.